Welcome back, you guys. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Swadik Mayaja, and I am Q the Nurse. And we are on another episode of the Everyday Hero Show, where I bring to you someone in your life or someone in my life that is doing some good things for us, but does not get the credit that they deserve. Today, I have Angela Simpson here. She works. Angela, you're a nurse, correct?
I am. I'm a
Yes.
registered nurse.
She's
Yep.
a registered nurse, and she has a passion. She wants to fix the problem that is workplace violence that us nurses deal with. And I think this is an amazing thing. And if you guys haven't known or didn't know, I currently am part of this nurse.org push to get everyone to sign a pledge where nurses support other nurses. And I thought it would be just a perfect timing to have Angela on. So I reached out and she okayed it, and she's on the show. So Angela, let's just first start from the beginning. Why don't you tell me and the people, who are you and why nursing?
So my name is Angela Simpson. As you said, I'm a registered nurse, and I am from Maryland. And I am a second career nurse, so I haven't been in it for that long. But one of the themes that I've had a little bit of passion about since the beginning is the incidents and the circumstances surrounding healthcare workplace violence. And we see it a lot in hospitals. Outpatient providers see it. Outpatients, EMS sees it a lot. It's pervasive everywhere.
Yes.
And it doesn't seem like much is done about it. And I think the one thing that kind of clicked in me that made me realize, wow, we got to do something about this, is my first time being assaulted. It wasn't severe. It wasn't outside of something expected for that patient. He didn't want me touching his IV. He had pretty severe end stages of dementia. And he had refused his medications for most of his visit, and his blood pressure went up over 200. And so we needed to get something in him. Yes. And this was the middle of the night. He was sleeping. So I decided to sneak in and try to give him something IV. So I go in, I hook it up, I go to push it, and his IV was occluded or just bad, and it woke him up. And I got punched in the head, right up.
Oh my goodness.
So, and there were no injuries, nothing like that. But the nurses who were there, a lot of the nurses that I worked with there had been on this unit for decades. And it was interesting to me that the nurses there, first of all, didn't really rally behind me to ask if I'm okay or anything like that.
I'm sorry.
But also seemed to respond as though I had been christened somehow, like I was now part of the gang. And it was such a weird response to me that it seemed so natural that it happened. It seemed like, wow, is this actually part of the job? And I mean, I was a newbie nurse, so I didn't say much about it. But as I've been in nursing and, I've gotten more involved in stuff and I've worked longer, it's really pervasive that this feeling in healthcare is that it's part of the job. And no, it's not part of the job. And so anyway, last year there was a widely published, well, not as widely as it should have been. There was an assault that happened in Illinois that just grabbed me.
Okay.
And it was so terrible.
Yes.
So this made me decide that there needs to be something done about it. So that's what got me into becoming an advocate in the world of workplace violence. And I founded an organization that's called Silent No More Foundation, and our mission is to help healthcare workers be safe at work.
Awesome.
So that was a very long-winded answer to your question. I'm a nurse, and I'm the founder and national director of Silent No More Foundation.
Okay, so I have just in that right there, I have already a million questions. But can we just go back to the beginning?
That's okay.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the beginning. So how long in your nursing career was this? Like, how new were you?
When the assault
with the
happened,
hat on the head, yeah, for with the patient with the IV.
I was maybe 4 or 5 months in.
4 or 5 months in. And I don't know what you were doing before. I don't know. You don't have to say, but in your career before, was workplace violence, was workplace assault, was that even a thing? Was that something you...
No, it would never have happened.
So when this happened to you, was it like, oh my God? Or were you just like what was your initial reaction to a patient hitting you in the head?
At first I was like, I can't believe that just happened. Yeah. What? And I stepped back, and he was pulled back like this, about to go again. And I said, no, that is not okay.
No, it's not.
Literally, those were the words that came out of my mouth.
Yes.
Like, you can't do that.
No, you can't.
It was more in the aftermath
that it all sank.
Step back and realize, did that just happen?
Oh, jeez.
And yeah, so my husband is a corrections officer.
Okay.
And you would think that they would have some pretty high incidents of violence in their job. But after that happened to me at work, like I said, I started to pay attention to it more. I actually looked into violence statistics, and it turns out that we are assaulted more on our jobs than corrections officers are. I told my husband that, and he's like, no. He kind of laughed at me saying it because it sounded so bizarre.
It does kind of.
Yeah, but there are more non-lethal assaults on the job for nurses than there are for corrections officers.
All right, so let's go back to, so you said 2 years ago is when you started Silent No More.
1 year ago.
1 year ago.
A little bit more than 1 year ago.
A little bit more than 1 year ago is when you started Silent No More. And ladies and gentlemen, Silent No More, the link, to get there is going to be down in the description box below. So click, and go visit to find some more information and ways you can help. Or if you need help, that's somewhere you can go. And we'll get there sooner or later. But I want to go back to, just the timeline. So did that article or that journal or that study come out and then you started Silent No More? Or was it after the event that happened in Illinois? It was
the event in Illinois.
Okay, so tell us about that event, and then I really want to talk about, you said that, was it a study? What was that?
Just articles.
Oh, okay, so you have to...
If you go on to BLS, and that's the Bureau of Labor Statistics, not
CPR. Yeah.
If you look at the statistics that are out from them and from OSHA and from CDC,
yes,
you'll find that this is actually widely publicized data.
Okay.
So I was reading stories here and there, and I would see stuff that was research. It was really more of a gathering of lots of other articles and stuff, not just one that got me.
All right, so I understand.
The event is what got me.
Please tell me what was the event, what happened, and why did it why did it shake you up so much that you thought you needed to start an organization for?
Yeah. At Delnor Community Hospital in Illinois, there was, at first it was publicized that everything was okay after there was a hostage situation. And the situation just kind of was a blip on media, and then it went away. But then in the following weeks, it came out that there were actually 2 nurses taken hostage, and one of them was beaten and raped and tortured for hours by an inmate who had managed to get the corrections officer's gun. So the way that it unfolded, and even more came out after that. So there was a corrections officer with an inmate, and the officer fell asleep. And the inmate had been unshackled for most of his visit. So when the corrections officer fell asleep, he saw the opportunity to get the gun and run. So he ran down to an office that had a nurse working in it. He told the nurse to take off all of her clothes and give him the keys to her car. And if there weren't any interruptions, he probably would have gotten out, pretty much just gone. But there was another nurse who saw what was happening, and she wanted to stop what was happening and make sure that her colleague was okay. So when she approached the room where he he decided to take her instead and found a little room down the on a different floor, and he raped her repeatedly. And every time there was a failed negotiation, she got raped.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So after hours of this, the SWAT team was there, and the only way that they were able to end the situation was to shoot through her to shoot him. So she was raped, tortured, shot, you name it, she went through it that day. And this is not okay. And that story just grabbed my heart and said, we need to stop this. And Silent No More was born. And since then, we've encountered other stories that are pretty severe as well, but that one is always going to be the one that I pay respect to as the inspiration for starting the foundation.
Oh, Jesus Lord. That is intense, if there ever were an intense situation. And oh my God, I mean, that's just so scary. The trauma, the stress, the entire situation is just horrifying. Horrifying. I have to ask, was she okay after they were pulled her out? Do you know if she, made it? Was the shot fatal? Like, how do you remember?
It wasn't fatal.
Okay.
She did get out of that situation. I don't know how much I'm at liberty to share.
Oh, of course.
But as of the last time I heard any information about this situation, neither one of them is working at that hospital anymore. So that's about the best that I can say right now, probably.
Wow. That is, oh my God. Okay,
yeah.
So that is like the most like extreme version of workplace violence I have ever heard, right? So that is super scary. And the reason I love what you guys do with the organization is because obviously that's not happening at every hospital. Obviously that's that's the extreme. Yeah. But the reason extreme stuff like that can happen or does happen is because, just like your situation, instead of everyone like being freaked out and saying, oh my goodness, why is the patient hitting you? They're like, oh, welcome to the club. Welcome to nursing, where you get hit, where, people patients push you, cuss at you, swear at you, the whole nine. And then like, it just creeps up. Next thing you know, you're getting pushed and shoved and all of these crazy things. And I do nursing news every Friday, and you guys most definitely should check it out. And once in a blue moon, and I'd say probably every other week, maybe every 3 weeks, I'm doing a story of a situation where nurses are in really shitty situations. The most recent one I remember is a patient attempted to rape a nurse. It was stopped prior to it happening, but that was the same something that happened. And there's stories like this. I mean, I can do stories like this all day, every day. It's super scary. But I want to start at the basic, and then we'll finish up top. I want to start. So, what is not your definition, but what does Silent No More use as the definition of workplace violence? Because some people may say bullying, some people might say catcalling, some people verbal abuse. What does Silent No More describe workplace violence as?
So there is actually a definition of workplace violence that breaks it down into 4 categories. I actually wrote them down because I had a feeling this might come up.
Oh, beautiful.
So the first category is criminal intent. So there's no relationship between the assailant and the people who are getting injured in some way, and that usually accompanies like robberies or something like that. We don't see that one quite as much. The second one is where a patient or a family member of that patient actually assaults somebody in healthcare that's providing care for them.
Okay.
And then the third one, that one's lateral violence. And that one is basically colleague to colleague. And that doesn't have to be physical. It can be other means of abuse. And then the last one is there's a personal relationship between the person who is the assailant and the victim. And you'll see that more with domestic violence. They're not coming in to hurt the healthcare worker, unless, of course, it's somebody who is somehow related to that healthcare worker. It's the location of the assault is not quite as important as they just want to assault that person.
Okay.
So
Okay.
assault, really, the definition of violence in general, it's pretty broad, and where you look, it takes different meanings. And, I think it depends somewhat on situation to situation, because obviously physical touching that's unwanted, that's assault. Sexual assault. Some instances you could consider verbal assault, like threats and stuff like that. I would go with kind of a loose definition that is based on a person intending to do harm, basically, and that can be physically or verbally.
So I think for this, I do definitely want to focus on the middle two and three, the patient on healthcare worker, and then the lateral violence of colleague to colleague, because I think those two are not so. Those two are the things that we can have, policies in place to, reduce that from happening. The other two seems very much one person being out of control. We can't really control. It's like you can't predict, right? That's 911. In
some circumstances, there actually is data to suggest that some things could be predictable and could be, and that's part of, when after the situation in Illinois happened, looking at what happened, you could see there were things that could have been a little bit predictive of what happened.
Oh yeah, a sleeping corrector also.
Yeah, exactly. And there are things that could have been done to prevent that. So don't let that one fool you, because sometimes that can be prevented.
And we'll get there, but
yeah.
The middle two is what I see the most of. I hear the most of, and like in the stories, like I do, I that's what I see the most of. So let's start with the patient violence towards healthcare workers. And one more thing before I get into that. Is silent no more strictly for nursing, or is it healthcare workers in general?
All.
Good
all
for you.
Healthcare workers.
Good for you.
I gotta tell you, yes. I get so many questions and messages asking, what can we do for EMS, or what can we do for doctors, or what about phlebotomists? And honestly, we need to be all inclusive. I try to always tell people, I am a nurse and I work inpatient, so it's hard to not have me get a little bit more focused on that. And I ask our members, if you think that I'm leaving you out, please tell me, because this is important to include everybody. So it's all inclusive.
And
face it.
Of course. And I say that because getting into the second type of violence, I was a nursing assistant prior, and a lot of my experience with this was definitely more so as a nursing assistant than it was as a nurse. But so I'm happy that you guys are super all-inclusive. I love that. I absolutely love that, and it's super necessary. So getting into type 2, let's break this down. Because the patient that attacked you, that assaulted you, you said it yourself, he had dementia. And that is one of the huge, I don't know, what is our response when you have a patient that comes in and he's inebriated and he's attacking the workers? If you have a patient who's super confused, dementia, it doesn't matter, mental disorder, it doesn't matter. But if the patient is not in the right state of mind and they are being violent, attacking, abusing healthcare workers, what is our response? How do we put blame on the person?
So my best way of answering this question is, if you had somebody assault you on the street, would you have feelings that are similar to each other if it was a drunk person or if it was a person with dementia? If you knew their situation, you'd feel different about each one. So there is something to say about severe mental illness. So if the person is not within their right mind because they have dementia,
that's very different.
You have to take that into account.
Of course, yes.
And unfortunately, and I hate this, you cannot prevent them all. But in the case of the drunk guy, if this drunk guy is walking down the street and he punches you right in your face as you're walking down the street, I don't consider being drunk a valid excuse.
That's a really good point, because you're right. The second you take that out of the hospital, it doesn't. I don't care. You drunk, not drunk. I don't care if you're in the right state of mind.
Yeah.
That's your decision.
That is actually the answer to a lot of questions. How would you feel about this if this happened on the sidewalk?
Yes.
Or, while you're at the grocery store?
Yeah.
How would you feel about it then? And that kind of draws the line on when it is appropriate to make a police report, press charges, and all of that. Yeah, I think that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. So let's start with that one, because I think that one's a little easy. Since you said that, literally after you said that sentence, what would you do if it was on the street? Like, it just obviously light bulb went off. You know, you do what you need to do. So if that does happen,
I'm sorry for interrupting, but I'll add to that. That is actually also part of where the culture has taught us to accept it. I mean, if you think about it, it wasn't something that occurred to you until I said it. Exactly. And that's because our culture in healthcare is that this is part of the job. It's just something you deal with.
Exactly.
It shouldn't be.
So in that situation, is Silent No More's suggestion, or the World Health Organization, or OSHA, or whoever, is the immediate suggestion report to the police? Is the immediate situation restraint? What, especially when it comes to being inebriated or just a violent person, what is the immediate response in those situations? What do you suggest nurses and healthcare workers at large do?
I think this is largely dependent on the victim's experience and how safe they feel. If my 100%, my official advice, report, always report no matter what, because this problem can get sort of sidestepped because, they never report violence. How can I fix it if I don't know that there's actually violence going on? Stuff like that. So always report. Always report. And it's a personal choice whether you report to law enforcement. That one is more complicated, because if you face the possibility of getting in trouble at work because you've brought law enforcement in, you have to balance that. I mean, people are always like, "Oh, we'll just go get another job." Well, it's not that easy.
It's not. What do you mean by getting in? Like, why would any healthcare worker get in trouble for reporting something?
So there is a presence of retaliation when it comes to this. And I mean, if you think about the big picture, it kind of makes sense in a way, because if you have a hospital, you don't want the patients to know that's a violent place. This isn't just a hospital where we work. This is also a place where patients go for care, and you don't want to scare them away. And if you contact law enforcement, then you've got that official report that shows up.
Oh, of course. Okay, that makes sense.
It's complicated, and people don't want their job to be affected. I've had a couple of people get in touch with me and say that their insistence that something get reported to law enforcement actually got them either fired or hours reduced.
Jeez. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, some people have actually faced that only reporting it in-house. There's one that comes to mind who actually did end up a little bit in the media, so I don't mind telling this story. There's somebody who was actually assaulted by a doctor, and it's on camera. And she actually reported it, and they actually reduced her hours and changed her to another floor. And, I mean, you don't want that to happen. So this is largely personal, based on what each victim wants to do. Overall, report. Always report.
Yes.
But do it safely.
Yeah. And then this is when I want to switch over to speaking with people who have mental disorders, and what's like it's an actual illness, right? Because it's a hospital, right? If you're sick, we need to take care of you.
Yeah.
Are there ever situations where we have to put our foot down and say no? Like, we need to send you off somewhere. Like, if a patient is violent, can the hospital, can the healthcare workers say, we're not able to take care of this person because they're too violent, they won't let us do anything, they need to go, right? Like, we can't do anything. Not them leaving AMA, but like we saying we can't take care of this person. Does that happen?
I think I have seen instances where patients were told they can't stay because they're too abusive towards staff. But I would, you don't get to hear that much about those stories. I've heard these in the media, not from an actual person who's seen it happen.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't happen much.
No.
So infrequently. So in those situations, I imagine the patients were probably stable. So I wish that I could give you a good, solid answer on this.
It's some of these things are hard, and like you said,
They are.
Yeah, it's like you said for the Pryor thing. It is very, very, very individualized. It's like every situation is super, super different, right? The most insignificant details here and there can change everything, right? So that does matter. All right, so moving over to patients who aren't in the right state of mind, right? So you definitely want to have with you in that situation a healthcare proxy. You want to have someone in those situations where you can tell them, this is the plan, this is the situation that we're trying to move forward with. Your uncle, son, brother, father, whoever, your family member is not cooperating. We need to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
When it comes to, I don't want to talk about the restraints and the chemical restraints and all of that stuff, because those things can and are sometimes necessary. But I want to talk to you about the guilt, right? Because sometimes it's hard, right? As a nurse, we want to take care of these patients, and especially if they're not in the right state of mind, if they have dementia, if they're mentally, there's some disorder going on. How do you reconcile? I'm going to stop taking care of you. I can't be your nurse. I can't be your doctor. I can't be your aide. Knowing that this patient is not, it's not them. It's not like, how do you personally do it? And what do you tell people when they're going through situations like that?
Well, I think you are the first person to ask me this question. And I think it is a great question that probably I'm going to put some thought into, because honestly, I hadn't considered it before. But I will say that we have to protect ourselves. And if we are at risk of some danger and harm coming to us, then unfortunately a tough decision has to be made.
Yes.
And I mean, again, it's probably largely circumstantial, but I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know.
No. And it's the truth, because I don't, and that's why I'm asking, because these are the kind of, and like for me, in my personal experience, when I was an aide, there was, when I used to work, and there were a couple of patients I can remember that was just very, I don't want to get washed ever, right? And I used to work in assisted livings and stuff like that, so it didn't matter. Comb the hair, brush your teeth, nothing. They didn't want anything, right? Yeah. So it didn't matter. Even if you were trying to transfer the patient, they would be pushing you because they would think that you were trying to do things, and you would just feel really bad. And there was no answer. There was no one answer. There was no one thing you could do. It was just very, very difficult. Coming to
in those situations, for me personally, when I'm on the job and I have somebody refusing something that they truly need, like those patients who refuse baths for a few days and they've got skin issues, or they need more help than what they're allowing. It's every now and then, and probably you can relate to this, every now and then you do get that patient who has such severe dementia, and they do fight back because they feel like they're being attacked. And I had one that was so severe because she had been abused in a prior facility, and she came to us with altered mental status, but it was so clear that she had been abused, and she got violent when we tried to engage in care. And I don't know if I was just feeling extra empathetic with her or what, but I had to like get off the floor and have a long cry over that, because it was just so hard. None of us likes the feeling of doing something against somebody's will,
Exactly.
but we also have to be safe.
Of course.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have any good advice on that, and I wish I did, because those situations are so unsettling.
Yeah, those are the difficult type of situations. I do want to talk about verbal abuse, right? Because this one, some people are like, "Oh my goodness!" Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Sorry, there was a little bit of static, but
It's okay.
verbal abuse, because this is the one I really don't want to be sounding like. I feel like this one, a lot of it is dependent on the nurse, right? Some nurses I know, like thickest skin, most nurses I know, thickest thing in the world. You can cuss them out; they'll smile walking in, smile walking out. Like brush off, get off. I don't care. Like
Yeah.
I'm done. Like I'm done. You're mad at me. Who cares? And then are the nurses? No, but I'm not saying it's the nurse's fault. I'm just saying it's dependent on the nurse. So how do we, as the around those nurses and going into those situations, judge verbal violence? If the day nurse comes in and she's okay with it, and the night nurse comes in and she's not okay with it, but it's the same patient, same situations, he's saying the same things, she's saying the same things, how do we deal with those situations?
So to that, I would actually ask, do you feel safe? I mean, yeah, we're going to have some stuff hurled at us inappropriately. But if they're threatening, not just rude, but threatening, then I think that does deserve being called out.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
For the ones that are tough as nails, I wish I were that strong. Because some things do get under my skin, and I take rejection like way too personally. So sometimes they get under my skin pretty easily. But I mean, if you are in a situation where you don't feel safe walking into the room because of this person's verbal abuse, then that needs to be addressed. One big question that has come up in doing this more than once is, if you have a patient who is just over the top, just rude, threatening, and all of that, if you have a patient who is that way and the nurse says, I will not care for this patient anymore, I get stuck on, okay, so if the charge nurse has this patient that's being refused by the nurse, what should the charge nurse do? And I'm a believer in reassigning, but what if all of the other nurses refuse the reassignment?
Yeah.
Who does it fall on then? I think this has a whole bunch of gray areas too. And like I said, I'm a believer in reassignment. We had a situation not too long ago where a woman was just really heinous toward her nurse, and I happened to be walking past, so I went in, and I mean, I'm not a charge nurse, but thankfully in that moment she viewed me as being somehow authoritative, and she was agreeable with me, and I managed to talk another nurse into taking her, and then the nurse who had her got reassigned. But you know, if you have everybody refusing an assignment to a patient who is particularly abusive, I'm not sure what the answer would be in that situation.
Yeah.
Everybody's got their stuff that they're willing to tolerate. And if they're willing to tolerate that, then, you know, unfortunately you get stuck.
Exactly.
And it's still not okay.
It's not okay. It's not okay. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about families, right? Because the verbal abuse sometimes is like the patients, they're frustrated, they're mad. I'm so empathetic with my patients. I'm a little less so with the families, and I know it's not good to say, because you know, family-centered care, you want to take care of the whole family. It's not just the patient, right?
Yeah.
But if I'm taking care of the patient, but like if a family member comes up to me in the middle of the hallway, starts yelling in my face, you didn't do this, my dad is sick, he needs to do that, my mom, whatever, right? That gets to me. That's my personal thing. That gets to me so much more than like if a patient's yelling. I get it. I can understand why a patient's yelling. But if a family member is yelling at me while I am trying to help the family members, whoever, it's so hard for me. Family members, do we consider them as part of this situation when they're screaming and yelling and cussing out nurses?
Yes, and they need to be kicked out if that's the way they're going to behave, period. There's no gray area here. If you have family members being abusive toward the staff, they don't need to be there. Okay. And I mean, if you don't want to be really mean about it, if you just want to say, go home, you're welcome to come back tomorrow if you're feeling like being nice. But there is no reason for allowing somebody who doesn't have to be there to treat us like garbage. Okay. I feel pretty strongly about that one.
Beautiful. I'm happy. That makes me feel a little bit better.
No, you're
so thank you. That one. And I do like. I didn't mention it when you said it, but I do really like the reassignments too. I think that's super helpful, and not even entire reassignments. Like in your situation, you walked in for a quick second, and then they agree for another nurse. For me, like I'd have hundreds of situations where a patient would not take meds for me because they thought I was lying or whatever. Send in another nurse, 1, 2, 3, and it's done. Reassignments are amazing. Just seeing a new patient. Great.
And they're really important to offer, I think.
Yes.
Just because there's no reason why a nurse should be forced to deal with that. You know, a nurse shouldn't have to. And if the patient really just dislikes that nurse, there's no reason why the patient should be forced to deal with that too. If you can easily reassign, just easily reassign.
Beautiful. And then I have one more question about the type 2, and then we'll jump over to type 3 because type 3 is a whole nother animal. Sexual assault and sexual abuse. When the cat calling, the grabbing of breasts, boobs, butts, the whole nine, all of that craziness. I have to admit, I did do a story a while back. I don't know the exact numbers, but it is insane how often and how many female healthcare workers report it. Male healthcare workers still report sexual violence. It's not, or sexual abuse. It's not a thing for men, but it's way less.
I have some thoughts about that, actually.
You think so?
Well, no, I have some thoughts about that.
Oh,
so
go ahead.
In the culture, women are more comfortable talking about and reporting sexual violence, whereas men actually hesitate to report it because they don't want to be seen as weak or anything that goes against the male persona that's considered appropriate for men. So men actually report significantly less. I wish I could remember the study. Maybe I'll send it to you in a little while.
Please.
There was a study that actually came out about this. It's the same with physical assaults, where men might not actually report as much as women, but it still happens.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a really good point that I actually didn't think about. But that's
okay.
That's
okay. That's why we're here.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, because you're right. You're right though, because if something were to happen, even especially if it's verbal, like you want to be a guy, you want to be strong, and Mr. Iron Man over here. You don't want to be, oh, my feelings were hurt. Having that conversation is a little. It's stereotypically, it's not what men do, right? It's not what men do.
Exactly. Don't want to. Exactly. They don't want to share it. Reporting for either sexual, verbal, or physical assault is already horrifically low. I read a number recently that said that only about 20% of assaults actually get reported.
Jeez.
So when you think about the data that's coming out saying anywhere from 60 to 80-something% are being assaulted, and only 20% are reporting, that's a big deal.
That's a huge. Yeah, that's an insane number. Okay. So, but just back with the sexual abuse, right?
Yes.
My thoughts are like this. So, when it's happening, right? I want to know So stop. This is not appropriate. Onto we can't ever have this happen. What is Silent No More's? So you say that you report it to whoever your higher up is.
Yeah.
What is the actions being put? Like, how do we prevent it from happening again? What's that plan?
Well, first, never go in the room alone.
Oh.
Never. And honestly, that right there, based on what I've read so far, that right there prevents most assaults from happening in the first place, whether it be sexual or physical or verbal. Well, verbal still happens a lot, but you have somebody else go into the room with you and it deters it most of the time. So that would be my very first advice. Second, call them out on it. Actually say, you cannot do this. That is assault. And sometimes putting it in those words will help it be established that, first of all, it's inappropriate, but also it's sexual assault, and that's illegal, and that's not okay.
Yes.
Yes.
So those two things probably would be the most effective things that I would mention. I mean, the problem is that we have patients who are in these rooms all by themselves, and there are no witnesses. So they may feel at liberty to do more because there are no witnesses. So, and if the nurse doesn't speak up and say, don't do that, then they may feel like they're getting away with it and they may do it again. So just bring in a witness.
I love that.
Absolutely.
I love that. Okay, so this is, and I wanted to make the switch on sexual abuse and sexual violence from type 1 to type 2, because a lot of the stories that I do with the type 2 violence, with the lateral violence, when it is colleague to colleague, type 3. I'm sorry. A lot of the colleague to colleague type 3 violence is a lot of the times it is sexual abuse. It is sexual assault. There is physical and there is verbal, and that definitely happens. But that happens a lot when it's from coworker to coworker, and that puts it at a very different. When it's a coworker doing it, it's so different. When it's a patient, you don't feel any pressure to go report it. You want to report it. You want to protect the next nurse coming on. It's a good thing to do. But when it's your coworker, it changes everything. So, so can you just tell me what silent no more stance is when it comes to the type 3 violence, when it comes to coworker on coworker?
All right, confession time.
Please.
Silent No More focuses almost primarily on 1 and 2. We don't focus on lateral or the personal relationship type because, I mean, there's already so much for types 1 and 2. There's so much. So we haven't plus it's a different dynamic when it is person to person. And, sometimes we'll have people who will share stories about lateral violence, and we are always an open book, and we'll talk it out, and we'll engage whoever comes to us about that, definitely. But in terms of expertise, I'm not the most expertised person for lateral violence.
For lateral violence.
So I could try to answer some of your questions. I don't know that I would have
like the official.
Yeah.
Respect. And the thing is, it's like I would love to just have this conversation because I've wanted to have this conversation a lot.
Definitely.
Just air some of this stuff out there, right? Because
absolutely. Absolutely.
Because it's a difficult thing, and I really, really, really find it difficult. And I don't want to say I've never been a victim of lateral violence, or have never been a perpetrator of because sometimes it's super hard to tell. And I have to say, as just a person that's been in healthcare for, I'd say, like 4 or 5 years now, only a nurse for 2, but healthcare for 4 or 5 years, a lot of the times when I felt uncomfortable, where I felt something cross the line, I haven't said it, but because I knew the intention of the other person. Like I know the intention of the other person is to make a joke. I know the intention is they just, it was just a phrase that they say. It's not something personal. They're not trying to attack me, hurt my feelings. What do you say to situations like that?
Where it's kind of in a gray area?
It's just because I only say it's like that because I know that I'm try to make jokes and try to be lollygag, but I know that I felt offended by other people trying to make jokes, and I didn't find it good, but I just didn't say anything because I knew they weren't being offensive. They were just trying to be funny. They were just trying to be, hip, whatever. Do you think those situations should be reported? Do you think all of those situations should be, HR, take it the whole 9 so it never ever happens? How do you play in those gray areas?
I think that this is such a complicated question that I don't even know where to start. I think that each person has a line in a different place. If you know that the intention of the person is to be damaging to you, then yeah, that's bullying behavior.
Yes.
I think that really you really need to define what is tolerable to you. And if you can't define that clearly for yourself, then reporting it would kind of make you a bit vulnerable to it increasing. This also requires having management that you can trust to adequately handle this without betraying your confidence, first of all, but without sharing it with anybody else. Like, it's got to be handled confidentially and appropriately, or else this is one of those things where you can end up making it worse for yourself. So I don't think that this is going to get any better until management gets better at handling it.
Respect.
It's just, and I say this somewhat from experience, because, you know, if you've got a manager who's buddy-buddy with a bunch of the staff and you come forward and say, look, this person was rude to me, if they're friends with that person, are they even going to bring it up?
Yeah.
You know? So I think it gets complicated. And a lot of managers are actually just promoted from the floor. So, you know, whoever they had alliances with before they got promoted, they're probably going to maintain those friendships. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I get you. I hear you. And I keep asking all these super great area questions, and they're super very, very individualized, but I appreciate you.
Do you know what, though? This is the best part of what we do with Silent No More Foundation. We look at these gray area questions and we discuss them. And I fully 100% believe that you have to ask these questions. You have to ask them with each other here like this, but you also need to ask these kinds of questions when you're in a room with management and when you're in a room with the people who do it. You just, until we hear all perspectives of a situation or all perspectives of a problem, until you've heard all of the perspectives, including asking the people that you really don't want to hear from, you can't solve a problem. You can't. Because I can't say, I'm trying to think of a really simplified way of putting this. Let's say I want to paint the walls blue, right? And somebody else wants to paint the halls green. Well, until we sit down and talk about the wall color together and see what we might be negotiable on or see what makes that person have that opinion, there is no way we're going to fix it. You can't. Go ahead.
You can't compromise unless you have a conversation. You can't get. It doesn't even have to be a compromise. You can't get an answer until you talk to all parties.
Absolutely. So when you ask these questions, the reason I love them is because I can't develop position statements. I can't develop plans or ideas, really, until something comes along to make me want to learn more, to make me want to develop another perspective. We have a couple of CEOs and CNOs who have come into the Silent No More group, and I love that because
that's awesome.
If we are going to make this better, we can't just decide that things are going to happen without including them.
Of course.
They have to be included because they know from their perspective what is possible. They know the whys and the hows of things being the way they are now. So when you ask these questions, you start that conversation. And that's why I love hard questions. Keep them It's all good.
Right. So for those who don't know, I actually met Angela when I went down to Washington D.C. for that nurses, convention thing that we had down there.
Nurses Take DC, yeah.
Exactly, Nurses
And then
Take
you have,
DC.
or not the NNU. What was the NNNE Nurses Networking event?
Yes,
We'll
it was.
be doing another one of those in October down in North Carolina.
Ooh, that's exciting.
Yep.
Yeah, you might see me there, y'all. Hey, what's up?
Will you? That'll be fun.
I have a good friend that lives down there that I needed to go visit soon, so that it might be two birds, one stone. But I remember specifically having a conversation with you, and you brought up a situation where it was a doctor that was pushing a nurse. So when you talk about coworker violence, lateral violence, it's especially when it's nurse to nurse, it's hard, right? It's even harder. It's much harder because I know when I go into do morning rounds, I'm not intimidated or it's just this. We know that there's doctors and nurses and they have different responsibilities, and the way it works is doctors write the orders, we follow the orders, right? So when things become situations like doctors are being violent against nurses, it's a much different. That power,
it's a different dynamic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That power dynamic is tough.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah. So my thoughts on that. First, I think that we need to, always respect the dynamic. They're the doctor and we're the nurse. And like you said, we do have different roles and there is a hierarchy. But I think, especially with younger doctors, I think it's time that we start to break down this barrier that exists. I think that there's kind of this I'm not supposed to talk to the doctor sort of vibe. But when we get to know them better, I feel like the respect between the doctors and the nurses becomes better. And it's because we're still shifting out of the paternalistic role of doctors, because we're still kind of shifting out of that. We're in this really weird limbo period for how they communicate with us and we communicate with them. It sucks that it's still happening. And unless we put our foot down and say that can't happen, and if we don't try our best to see what's going through their minds, it's not going to end.
It's not. Yeah,
so
right.
One of my biggest things, and actually I am on Twitter, at Angela SNMF, if anybody wants to find me.
It will be on the screen.
Cool. So when I communicate there with a lot of the doctors there, or if I'm even just, sometimes I get really ranty, so I post stuff that's kind of ranty. But I think a lot of it also is that we don't know from their perspective what they're going through, and they don't know from our perspective what we're going through. And increasing that communication is a really big deal in developing that mutual respect. So I love to break down that barrier. And if you have a doctor coming at you frustrated or nasty to you because something in their mind went wrong, and especially if you had no choice because of policies or whatever, when they've calmed down and when you've calmed down, actually have a conversation about what happened, how it happened, and ask, how can we make sure this is better in the future? Because I don't want to do that again.
Yeah.
We just, for doctor, nurse, and other areas of the hospital, for communication between different types of staff, got to get the barriers down. We got to talk to them more. I really think that will make that happen much less frequently. I think that it will be less abusive and less paternalistic, and I think that's really important.
And again, it's just hitting me with them gems, Angela. Hitting me with them gems. I absolutely love that, because as soon as you say these things, it sparks in my brain cells, right? So, and you're so right. You're so right. And I immediately took that to the nurse and the CNA situation, because that happens a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
They are the people that we see the most in any shift.
Exactly.
And if they feel like we're looking down on them, if they feel like we just toss them all the bad stuff and we just sit and play on the computer all night, they're never going to feel like they can break through that barrier either.
Exactly.
So, you just have to, reach across the bridge.
And
Whatever that saying is.
yeah, and it's good that you say that because the civil conversations I've had with doctors and CNAs and other nurses, it's like, yeah, a lot of doctors are like, it's super frustrating. I have 20 patients, I have 10 patients that I need to go see, and they put these orders in. Can you please just get the order done when it needs to get done? And then like you'll talk to the nurse and say, homie, back up, because I'm trying to do 15 things at once, right? And then the same situation, like you go into a patient's room and they're not dressed, and it's like 5 p.m. and you're like, where are the nursing assistants? I can help if you need me to help, but why in the world are these patients still in their PJs? The family's yelling at me, and the nursing assistant's is like, I have 4 patients that need, so like that communication is so important.
In that case, staffing legislation. I know you're immersed in it because you're in Massachusetts, right?
Yes. Yes.
Staffing.
Yes. Staffing legislation. Woot woot. I love that, Angela. Angela, I appreciate this whole thing. Okay, so I want to just end this by talking the details of Silent No More. Where can we find you? What is the immediate goal? What are you guys working on right now? And like, what can we do to help that?
So right now, I think right now we're just working on building our community. Doesn't sound like much, but it's really important to do when you need to have more active people on your side.
Of course.
I also need to kind of narrow my focus because I'm like, oh, I gotta do that. I am like a little spaz when it comes up to everything that we need to do right now. We are going to be going to the networking event in
North Carolina, you said?
North Carolina, yes. So we will be there, but I actually have been thinking and talking to the board about revamping our website completely, because right now it's just a shell. It's nothing right now. And working on delivering content. And we also are rewriting, well, I don't want to say rewriting, we're developing a legislative bill. We're going to do a Silent No More bill that we will use as a template in all of the states.
That's awesome.
So we actually got a major, awesome gift, I guess you could say, maybe, from Illinois Nurses Association. They just got a bill passed there, and they donated their bill to us. So we're working on that to make sure that it is applicable and covers everything that we want it to cover. So that's really exciting.
What's the bill?
You mean what is it going to be?
Yeah. What's the idea behind it? What is it for? What is it against? What is it preventing? What is it? Like, what is it?
Well, I would probably say let's defer until I have all the thing done, because it's like I don't want to forget something. But the basics, prevention plans, plans for law enforcement to be present, reporting processes, debriefing processes, oh my gosh, I know there's more, anti-retaliation measures.
So a whole lot of policy and regulations when it comes to it comes to those very specific situations of how to move forward when things happen and how to prevent those things from happening again. Love it. Of course.
It's under the umbrella of all health.
Okay.
Which is not the way things have been focused so far. It's going to have EMS, outpatient, home health, inpatient. If it's a healthcare worker, they're going to be included. And that, I think, is a really big deal, because right now a lot of states have coverage for some healthcare workers, but not all of them. And it's frustrating to the people who are not covered by it, because we're all doing such similar things. And it would make sense to cover everybody.
Yeah,
so
it would make sense to cover everybody. That would be nice to cover everybody. And when you just said all people, we need to do this again, because we can spend a day talking about this. But I've heard some insane horror stories from visiting nurses, from PTs that go to patients' homes. Those are some of the scariest stories I've ever heard when it comes to workplace violence. So,
and you know what? I'm going to plug really quick. I need some health nurses to talk to me about their ideas. I don't have really anybody who has come forward to talk to me about this, because if we're going to put language in the legislation for something that can help protect them, I want to hear from them to hear what their ideas are. So I need you guys.
I love it. I love it. You're so good. All right. So so you told us your Twitter handle. Where can we find you other than that? Like, where can we find you or Silence No More?
Yeah, so that was my Twitter, and then Silent No More has an official Twitter. It's Silent No More FND. Then we're also on Facebook. We have a private group where we have more discussion, and members post stuff all the time. And we have a page, and you can find both of those by searching Silent No More Foundation. Yeah.
Awesome. Angela, thank you so very much for this. I really do appreciate this. This was awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, I do want to say this, and I say this only when it's true. I never say this when it's not true. But the only reason I'm having this conversation with Angela is because I reached out to her via social. So if you do, go to her Twitter, go to the Facebook page, go have those conversations with her. If you have questions, I promise you will be having a conversation with her, because this is the only reason we are talking right now.
Oh my gosh, I never shut up about it. So find me.
Please and thank you.